they'll miss me.
Well,
A little.
occasionally.
Notice I've got my long sleeve pullover on here. There are some advantages to being quarantined. I'm imagining it's kind of hot out there.
Yeah, yeah, being in the air conditioning. I feel like you found a glitch in the system that you
I
learned.
cracked the
This is
code.
you did. This is a vet move you did here. I have to give you a lot of credit. All right, well, let's go ahead and dive in. I know we wanted to talk a little bit about special teams today. That is a group that doesn't always get all the love. And actually, you know what? This is perfect now that we're seeing the shot. It is also Women of Red Day at training camp. So we are so excited to have all of our amazing members of Women of Red out here. They got a cool balloon arch as everybody walks in. They're going to have a few little special performances and things for everybody. So welcome to all the Women of Red members. But looking at some of our special teams people, you see Keith Tandy, one of our former players and special teams coaches right there in the front. Tell us about some of the, we're gonna talk about both return jobs and gunner jobs. Let's start with the return men and all the potential options and what you feel like this team is looking for and needs in that spot.
Yeah, when you talk about the return guys and also like the potential gunners, we're going to talk about guys where this job on special teams might determine whether or not they're on the roster. There's a very good chance of that with most of the guys we're going to talk about here. When we talk about return, it's kind of the story we've been following the whole camp, especially for punts. In that, Jaden Mickens is basically your incumbent, and he was solid last year. Had some big returns in the playoffs, and then Jalen Darden, who you drafted in the fourth round, partially because you thought he could be a return man, a dynamic return man on this level. Those two kind of are similar body types as well. So you feel like they might be battling for one position, especially if you keep only six receivers. So there are uh, continues to be involved in the rotation when they're doing punt returns. He really hasn't had a chance in the regular season, but he said the other day that he really would like to. And he's kind of a dynamic runner. He's definitely fast. So if he got out of it in the open field, you could get some big plays, and that's really what the Bucs return game has been missing for a couple of years now is big plays.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask is what do you hope for in that position? I mean, there have been so many rule changes, that I think make it harder in some ways to have impact plays. They've done so much in terms of where you're returning from and the starting lineup. I feel like they've changed so much with the safety idea when it comes to special teams. So, what do you feel like that position needs to do to be considered successful?
Well, it depends if you're talking punt or kickoff return, because I think that's what you were referring to with the different rules is kickoff returns, and that's largely been minimized, especially for the Bucs because they have Bradley Pinion who kicks almost every ball deep enough for a touchback. I think we only had to cover 13 kick returns last year. Of course, you're talking about our return man, so it matters who their kickoff guy is. But you could see some other guys on there that make the roster for other reasons, and since it's not that critical of a job anymore, really kickoff return. So you maybe get Keyshawn Vaughn or Gio Bernard or somebody like that already has a roster spot, but then you can use them there if you don't want to use whoever out of Jaden Mickens, and Jalen Darden is your punt returner. But on punt return, the rules are pretty much the same there. And an interesting point along those lines is the rules are different between college and the NFL. And in college, everybody is allowed to immediately go down the field on the snap, which is why they do those rugby style kicks. Whereas in the NFL, only the gunners can go on the snap, and everybody else has to wait for the ball to actually be punted. And that's why the Buccaneers thought, even though Jalen Darden had nice statistics in college, they weren't overwhelming. They thought he actually would have an opportunity to do much more on the NFL level.
Well, we have more on special teams we're going to talk about, but real quick, we want to show you the Ticketmaster play of the day from yesterday. And man, it was an exciting practice out here. Scott, I was sad that you missed it. We had Rojo diving in for the touchdown. They were doing a bunch of goal line work, and man, it was definitely a practice where there were some pads on. It was getting a little chippy. You could tell guys are getting tired of hitting the same people over and over again. And this is about when that tends to kick in every year that you haven't had a game yet. You've had a lot of days of camp. It's hot, and they were having to tell guys to dial back on the intensity a little bit. And coach, as always, says he'd rather have to tell them whoa than sick them. And so I
Right.
think that the aggressiveness, in case people were wondering if they were resting on their laurels from the Super Bowl, that is not a thing. So let's continue
Yeah.
on with our special teams discussion. And I want to hear now, let's talk a little bit about the gunner jobs and who we've lost and who might be able to fill some of those spots.
Well, there really are a ton of candidates, really a lot. And it basically comes down to obviously speed, but how well you can get past those blockers, especially when they give you 2-on-1. We lost Ryan Smith, one of the few players not coming back from the Super Bowl roster. And Ryan was a cornerback, but he really didn't play cornerback the last few years. But he was probably our best gunner, and he was also really good at that downing the punt inside the 5 maneuver that is so helpful. But a couple guys I'd point out, because like I was saying before, I think this could really help solidify a job. And Keyshawn Vaughn, I've seen him getting reps as the gunner, which I don't think he did last year, so that's new. And then Antonio Hamilton, who was the cornerback that we signed, who played with the Chiefs and actually was in the Super Bowl against us last year. These are a couple guys that, like Antonio Hamilton, for instance, is really on the back end of a very crowded cornerback depth chart, fighting for a 5th or 6th spot. And if he could be a gunner for you, that would really make a big difference. And I also go back to this Ross Cockrell experiment at safety. Coach Arians has said that could help you keep another gunner active on game day if you have one defensive back who can cover a number of different spots. That gives you possibly another open spot on the 47 or 48 guys you keep active on game day to keep up another gunner. And it seems to me that also gives you potentially another spot on the 53-man roster for the same reason. So the Ross Cockrell experiment, which seems to be going well, could help some of these guys get a spot. But yeah, Antonio Hamilton and Keyshawn Vaughn, a couple of guys to look out for on Saturday night as gunners.
And of course, we can't talk about special teams without talking about Ryan Suckup and just what a huge part of this Super Bowl run he was. And after, there had been storylines about kicking woes with this team, he just put those completely to bed. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on his contributions to this team and what he means coming back. We talked about bringing all these starters back, and sometimes people didn't even mention him in terms of bringing everybody back in terms of the starters. But that's a huge person to be able to know that you have that consistency again.
Yeah, I really missed not being at that practice on Saturday when they went live for the first time. It always brings up the intensity. But also, apparently, some other things I'm missing is Ryan Suckup had a pretty good day on Saturday from what Coach Arians said. I think he hit 7 of 8 maybe, and it was because they were doing these live periods and really rushing you onto the field to kick a field goal like you would in a game, rather than these field goal periods in practice where you kick one from 32 and then you kick one from 35 and so on. And Coach thought maybe, being in the actual game atmosphere and speeding up his movements was one of the reasons Ryan did so well, because honestly, Coach said it, so it's fine for us to acknowledge it's been a bit of an up and down camp for Ryan. But as you saw in that graphic there, and certainly by the start of the regular season, and man, you've got everything you've been wanting for the last decade. The accuracy on the field goals. He also never missed a single one inside the 40. He was perfect in the playoffs. A bunch of team records there for a single season. And if not records, 90.3 was second only to a good Connor Barsh season in terms of field goal percentage. So it was really everything the Buccaneers could have hoped for. And Coach Arians is positive we'll have that kicker again in the regular season.
All right, well, we have tons more coming up here on Training Camp Live, including getting to your Facebook questions. So if you have those for us, make sure you leave them in the comment section underneath the Facebook Live video. For now, let's check out some highlights from yesterday's practice.
To describe the homies, the grave diggers. Them boys deadly.
One word to describe the grave diggers.
Can't stop me.
One word to describe the grave diggers. First of all, they are stealing someone else's slogan. Number one.
Thrashers.
Oh, they thrashers. Never mind, they're the thrashers. But grave diggers is for somebody else I know. From BR.
One word to describe grave diggers. It's not one word. It's just not that simple.
Lit.
Ruthless. Tenacious.
Practice, routed. Games, pretty tough.
Welcome back into Training Camp Live. Casey Phillips here, joined by Scott Smith from his house, and we are still bringing you all the live look-ins to practice. We're going to be getting to your Facebook questions in the final segment here, so leave those underneath the Facebook Live video if you have those for us. Scott, let's go ahead and talk about the defensive line some, that this is a group that, like most of the position groups we've talked about this camp, those starter jobs, we know who's got those locked up, but this is a very deep group that is one of the few positions where you do have a good rotation, where it is not just starters. It's not like Devin and Levante playing basically the whole game, that you're going to need some of these other guys in there. So let's talk about some of these defensive linemen and the depth at this position.
Yeah, we've done a couple breakdowns last week. I think it was with the corners and the safeties and the linebackers, just looking at what the Buccaneers brought back from last year and then the possible newcomers or roster hopefuls. And we haven't done that yet with the D-line. We've talked about it. I think when we talked about it last week, I was saying how deep it was, and then I couldn't name them all because there's so many of them. So I was going down the list, so I thought it'd be good to actually put up a list. Here's the guys every guy that took a snap for us last year at defensive line, which is the interior defensive line, and that's a lot of guys. And honestly, every single guy on that list, none of them would be surprising to see them on the roster. You know, I think 6 is probably the target number, but we actually ran with 7 for a good part of the year. And then in the playoffs, when Vita came back, we had 8 defensive linemen on the 53-man roster, which is an enormous amount. But, you know, obviously these are all guys that they value. I think it's kind of like I've talked about at corner. If you've got a good one, you don't want to let them go, so you maybe just expand how many you keep there. And then so there's some newcomers, not a ton of them, but some guys that haven't taken a snap for us yet in the regular season. And you see them here. You got a couple guys that are new to the team this year in Ponder and Renner. And then Benning Hatoe and Kobe Smith both were on the practice squad, Benning for the whole year and Smith for most of the year. So they have a good feel for what these guys can do already. It's just a really competitive group. And honestly, it's a place I could see us going a little extra deep on the 53-man roster.
That's interesting. We're just collecting those Washington guys, you know, between Vita and Benning and Joe Tryon. Apparently, they enjoy that defense over there. And looking at Todd Bowles' defense and what the defensive line in particular was asked to do and did, what were some of the things that you feel like fit them really well? What did they do so well as a group last year? And do we see any reason why they wouldn't be able to perform at just as high a level this year?
Well, you just watched Ndamukong Suh walking out there. And obviously, anytime a player gets into his 30s, you start wondering, you know, when is the year where he might decline a little bit. But I don't think anybody's worried about that with him. And you got Vita Vea, who's just coming into his prime. And you got Will Golston, who's really proved to be rejuvenated by this Todd Bowles defense and a perfect fit in the base defense. And, you know, what these guys do, especially Suh and Vea, is they eat up double teams. And Coach was saying the other day, not only do they eat up double teams, Vita beats double teams. But even just attracting 2 blockers, it's pretty obvious what that does for your front line. And it's why the majority of our sacks last year came from the edge guys. But Ndamukong Suh still had 6, and Vita Vea had a couple in just 5 games before he got hurt. So that's an area that they could actually have more of an impact this year. Obviously, the Buccaneers have had the number 1 run defense 2 years in a row, and that's a rare thing. I think the last time a team had that was back in about 2008 or 9 with Minnesota, so it doesn't happen very often. It's hard to maintain that top ranking. So I would expect them to be good in that regard, but if they could get more pressure up the middle, that defensive front could just be, hard to stop.
And I think, we were looking at that last shot, and we saw Will Golston there, and it just made me think about how he, to me, is maybe one of the most underrated guys on this team in terms of what all he has meant to this franchise and for how long, and in playing in so many different defenses, different roles for him, and just how reliable he is and consistent he is. Is that something that you would agree with, that he could be maybe one of the more underrated guys in terms of the contributions he's made here?
Oh, yeah, he's underrated right now. And then when his entire career is over, hopefully not for a while, he'll probably go down as one of the more underrated Buccaneers that we've had, period. And you're right. He's had to adjust to different roles. He's had seasons where they asked him to put on weight, and he's had seasons where they asked him to take off weight. And what happened for him, which was fortunate, was Todd Bowles came in with this defense, which is similar in structure to the one that he was drafted to play in. And it's really fit him very, very well. And I think when you're talking about underrated, Bucs fans would be surprised to know, those who don't already know, that man, number 92, actually led the Buccaneers in quarterback hits last year with 20. Not Shaq Barrett, not JPP, not Ndamukong Suh, but Will Golston.
Wow, that's an incredible statistic. That's really interesting. And Rose, I also wanted to get your take on the fact that John Lynch is now officially in the Hall of Fame, and we get to talk to TJ about it a little bit, that you're also someone else who was around for that whole career, and to hear for you what it was like to see him get inducted, and just what that means to him and, of course, the Buccaneer organization as well.
That was very, very gratifying to see, something we've been waiting for a long time. I also was very appreciative that he called me the week before so I could do a little interview and we could have some stories on the website about it. And just to hear his story about how he found out. I don't know if you saw the video of David Baker coming to his house, because every other year that's a knock on a hotel room door in the Super Bowl city. And John's been through that 7 times before as a finalist. He never got the knock. He always got the phone call that the guys who didn't get selected get. So this time he actually had a knock on his door. Didn't know it was coming because his wife Linda had worked with the Hall of Fame and set it all up, had his whole family there, and kept it from him. So he told me that he doesn't know why he was made to wait 8 years. But in the end, he was really glad with the way it came out because he was able to be surprised and have his whole family there with him.
That is absolutely incredible. Well, we are going to have another segment where we're getting to your Facebook questions. So if you have those for us, leave them in the comment section underneath the Facebook Live video. And for now, we're going to meet another one of our rookies, Robert Hainsey.
It was a great feeling to finally get that call after working towards that point for since I was like 7 years old. Super exciting time and just overload of emotions. But like I said, I don't even know if I still kind of realized it. I think when some of the vets roll in, it might feel a little bit different. You start meeting some of the guys, and that'll be really exciting. But for now, just taking it, one day at a time and trying to do everything I can to help the Buccaneers. When I was a freshman, I came in 2017, and the starting offensive line was, going into that year, was Mike McGlinchey, Quentin Nelson, who were both top 10 picks in 2018, and then you had Sam Musfer and Alex Bars, who were both undrafted in 2019. And the cool thing about that is all 4 of those guys are starting in the NFL right now. Sam and Alex for the Bears, Q for the Colts, Mike for the 49ers. So I was playing as a freshman at right tackle, and we talk about the standard in the room a lot, who we are, what we do, and how we act as an offensive line unit. So I was out there with 4 guys who knew what they were doing, have been in the system, and started a lot of games for Notre Dame. So I had to learn real quick how to live up to that, because we always talk about don't be the guy that lets the unit down. You don't want to mess up something that you could have done right. At Notre Dame, we all fist bumped each other before every play. And so, like, in our notes, we'd write down fist bump next play, no matter what happened. It's never as good as you think, and it's never as bad as you think, but you just got to keep going one play at a time and do your job to help the team. It's funny going from being a 2-time captain at Notre Dame, just being the veteran, knowing everybody in the building, being that guy that kind of walks around and understands how things work. I'm coming to here and I don't know how anything works. Really excited to learn from all these guys that have so much experience. It's going to be awesome. There's so much to be told and for me to be heard that I can take with me, and a lot of things I'll just keep using throughout my career. I can't wait. I talked about my personal goals, and that's how it is. Help the Bucs win, be the best player I can be, and have the best unit in the league. I think anything I can do to get to there, I'm going to feel good.
Well, we got that interception, and I was really pissed off after we don't make it on 3rd down, and I called for the punt team. Called timeout just to think about it, go through the scenarios. The worst case scenario for me would they might get a field goal, we would still be winning.
Typically, you want to try to, in that situation, you want to at least get a field goal, but we're right on the edge of field goal range.
We hit the 4th down play, and BA was like, we're going for it. We're going to, let's take one shot.
And after calling a timeout and thinking about it, on 4th down, the offense comes back out on the field.
I went over to find Brian Griffin so I could hear what the play call was, and I heard the play call, and it was not what I was expecting at all.
We're going to try to get out of bounds here, or?
Oh, we'll see.
Either end zone or out of bounds. Gun bunch left. Everyone's got to go.
We say we're taking a shot. So me and Scotty have mirrored routes. We both run go balls. His is from a tighter split.
And I saw the corner was kind of squatting because corner, I don't know if he was just playing to keep us out of field goal range. The thing with Scotty is once he's running, if you don't get your hands on him and he can get up to full speed, he's going to run by basically anybody.
Really the key play on that was Leonard Fournette Gronk got beat inside, and Leonard came across and hit the guy right as Tom was getting ready to throw the ball.
I see Tom throw the ball, and like I see Scotty just like get the step with him. I'm like, no, there's no way Scotty's gonna get this.
Brady goes for the deep shot. He's got a touchdown. Scotty Miller. Oh my God.
I just threw it out there, and Scotty just tracked it down.
Scotty Miller got behind the defense and for 39 yards gets the touchdown, and what a half.
You already know. You already know.
That's one of the biggest plays of the season right there.
Like, just no shot. There's no way that this just happened like before halftime. It's written. Like, we have to win this game.
The situation, like, I think some teams would have tried to, run the quick out, get out of bounds, make the field goal a little easier, but that's just not the way, like, BA and Byron see the game.
Hey, that's what I dreamed of, baby. Playoffs, championship, let's go, boy.
Welcome back into Training Camp Live. Casey Phillips here, joined by Scott Smith remotely, and we are going to be taking your Facebook questions now. So our first one actually is from Matthew. He said, how long is Bradley Pinion locked up, and is there any chance of competition, or has he won the starting job?
Well, I'll start at the end there. There's no other punter in camp, so yeah, he's your starter. And, I really think they like what he brings in terms of how good he is at directional punting and dropping punts inside the 10. And obviously that extra value from being such a good kickoff guy, basically the best or one of the two best kickoff guys the last 2 years. I wish I could come up with the answer for the first part of that question. I don't remember. I would suspect that this year and next year he's still under contract, but don't hold me to that because I can't remember for sure.
Okay, and Robert had asked, how is the right guard position looking? Is Cap back at full go?
Yes, and in fact, both he and Bruce Arians talked about that last week. There's no issue with his ankle. He's completely healthy and moving around just fine, and Coach says he looks good. But also that Aaron Stinney, they have a lot of confidence in him now too. So Coach has said there's always competition, and as Todd Bowles said the other day, you're the starter until somebody plays better than you, then they're the starter. So there's always room for competition and winning jobs, but there doesn't look like a lot of open jobs on this team. But you have to think that at least Aaron Stinney is getting the look as a possible guy if he were to play better than Alex Kappa. But I don't think that's the plan. I think they're set with him at right guard.
Okay, and Jonathan had asked, do you think we have 3 wide receivers with a chance to each get a 1,000-yard season this year?
I know that has happened before, but it is very rare to have 3 of those on one team. So what did Tom Brady throw for last year in the regular season? Like, I think 4,700, 4,600. When you think about all the guys that are going to get some yards, like Rob
all your
Gronkowski,
tight ends,
and your running backs and Scotty Miller. I know the 3 he's talking about obviously is Mike Evans and Chris Godwin and Antonio Brown, but I got to believe somewhere along the way one of those guys maybe they'll miss a little time or just not enough footballs to go around. So I'd be really surprised if we had 3,000-yard receivers.
Although now we do have an extra game, so it's going to be interesting to see the way that changes these stats. Where are we going to say after 16 games, oh, well, this is what would have been the end, and does it count? Or maybe there are guys getting 1,000 yards because there is one more game, that we think about how close some of those statistics have been for the games in the past where it came down to the fourth quarter of the last game for Mike Evans to get that one extra catch. So a whole other game, that really is going to change all these type of stats that we've used as benchmarks moving forward. So that's going to be interesting to see.
It's a good point, and you always remember that. I always forget that 17th game, and then you bring it up, and I'm like, oh, good point. But I think when
it throws a wrench into everything.
And when it comes to records, it is what it is now. There's not going to be any asterisks or anything. If that extra game gives Mike Evans a chance to break his own record, then so be it. He's going to have the new record. That's just the way it's going to be. There's not going to be any discussions about this wasn't relevant or that doesn't count. The new record will be the new record.
Yeah, that's very true. Christopher said, how many interior defensive linemen do you see us keeping?
Well, that's what we were just talking about in the last segment. And I got to believe that Vita Vea and Ndamukong Suh and Will Golston are set. Nacho, who did such a good job as a starter for most of last year, seems pretty likely. Steve McClendon, obviously, they traded for him and then re-signed him, so they like him a lot. And I think they want to see a lot more out of Khalil Davis, or at least a little more, some more opportunities for him. So to me, I just named 6 right there that are pretty close to locks, if not necessarily locks. And I didn't even bring up Patrick O'Connor, who was on the roster all last year, largely because of how good he is on special teams. So it wouldn't surprise me to see 7. 6 or 7 would be likely.
Okay, and I think I think this name is Junus. I think I'm getting that right. Said, what is the competition for safety looking like? Who are the starters if the season was starting right now, and then who would be the order of the backups?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we saw when Jordan Whitehead missed the first week or so of camp that Mike Edwards stepped up and was starting alongside Antonio Winfield, who is the surest lock of all of them to be a starter, I think, Antonio Winfield. But it was only a day or two after Jordan got back that he was right back there with the first team next to Antoine Winfield. So I think those two are clearly the top 2 starters at this point, although as we saw, especially in the second half of last year, they still find a lot of ways to get Mike Edwards on the field, and he certainly can start if needed. And then what's interesting is when Jordan Whitehead came back, we saw a lot of Mike Edwards along with Ross Cockrell as the second team of safeties, which is interesting because Ross just started picking up that position here in camp. So right now, I would say those are your top 4. They obviously like Javon Hagan a lot. Raven Green is a guy that missed the beginning of camp for personal reasons, but showed a lot of promise in Green Bay when he could stay on the field. So I think I've named probably the top 6 right there.
Okay. Next up, Kyle wanted to know which rookie has made the biggest impression so far at camp outside of Joe Tryon.
Okay. Probably just based on the position that he plays, it's been Jalen Darden because Robert Hainsey's an offensive lineman, hard for them to make an impression. Plus, he's been out for a little bit. Well, I don't know if he's back today. You're there. The 2 linebackers, basically running with the second or third team. I don't think we've seen huge plays out of those guys, but because he's a receiver, and even before the pads went on, Jalen Darden could make a lot of very splashy plays. So I would say it's probably him.
Okay, and then we also had a question from Jonathan asking, has the league formally addressed the practice squad size and rules yet for this year?
If I were there, I would have asked Mike Greenberg or somebody that probably at some point this past week because obviously they're going to have to make a decision on that pretty soon. The last thing that came out about that, unless I missed it today, was that the league hadn't decided yet, but there was a general feeling that they were going to stick with last year's rules, which would include a 16-man practice squad, which obviously the Buccaneers would love if that were the case. They'd like to keep as many of these guys around as possible. So I think that's probably what it's going to be when it comes down to it. All the rules from last year they'll use again just to maintain that roster flexibility because, everybody's hoping that this year is a little bit easier than last year, but we're not through this yet, as you can tell by me being quarantined here. So
right,
I think
obviously.
they'll want to keep that flexibility.
Okay, and then we'll close with this one. We had, now I lost it. Where did it go? Here it is. Nick wanted to know, how are the rookies KJ Britt and Grant Stewart fitting in?
Well, again, and we get asked this every few days or so. The best thing you can say about those 2 guys, I think, is that Coach has repeatedly mentioned that the reserves have actually done a better job with their mental error sheet when they go through and review the practice than even the starters. They're doing a really good job of knowing what they're supposed to do, retaining the playbook. And that's the first step, actually. Obviously, you have to know what you have to do. And then for KJ Britt in particular, Coach mentioned that when the pads came on last week, that kind of took him to another level because he's a hitter. He's a football player, and he wants to be in pads. He wants to be hitting guys. So I think we're going to have a lot more to talk about guys like Britt and Stewart and a few others after we've had this first preseason game on Saturday.
Completely agree. All right, well, that is going to do it for us on this edition of Training Camp Live. Thank you so much for everyone for joining us. Thanks for those amazing questions. We will be back tomorrow with another show, so make sure if we didn't get to your question today, you ask it again tomorrow. Here's, again, the schedule of the days left that we have the show, so we'll see you then.